What's up? Hair going crazy right now. I think I'm gonna leave it though. I'm gonna light a candle though to set the mood. I don't know if you can see it, but I can see it. Okay. JK. That was my last match. Part 3. We're still on chapter 1, isn't that crazy? Chapter long as a mammer jammer. Just gonna start from the top of the page, because I think that's where we were. Shout out the person who commented on my YouTube video. Love you. Alright. I was trailing along behind my mother, only half paying attention to what she was saying, when she stopped in front of a painting so suddenly that I almost ran into her. "Oh, sorry," she said, without looking at me, stepping back to make room. Her face was like someone had turned a light into it. This is the one I was talking about," she said. "Isn't it amazing?" I inclined my head in my mother's direction in an attitude of attentive listening, while my eyes wandered back to the girl. She was accompanied by a funny old white-haired character who I guessed from his sharpness of face was related to her. Her grandfather, maybe? A houndstooth coat, long narrow lace shoes, as shiny as glass. His eyes were close set, and his nose beaky and bird-like. He walked with a limp. In fact, his whole body listed to one side, one shoulder higher than the other. And if his slump had been any more pronounced, you might have said he was hunchback. But all the same, there was something elegant about him, and clearly he adored the girl from the amused, companionable way he hobbled at her side, very careful where he put his feet, his head inclined in her direction. "This is just about the first painting I ever really loved," my mother was saying. "You'll never believe it, but it was in a book I used to take out of the library when I was a kid. I used to sit on the floor by my bed and stare at it for hours, completely fascinated. That little guy, and I mean, actually it's incredible how much you can learn about a painting by spending a lot of time with a reproduction, even not a very good reproduction. I started off loving the bird, the way you'd love a pet or something, and ended up loving the way he was painted." She laughed. "The anatomy lesson was in the same book, actually. But it scared the pants off me. I used to slam the book shut when I opened it to that page by mistake." The girl and the old man had come up next to us. Self-consciously, I leaned forward and looked at the painting. It was a small picture, the smallest in the exhibition, and the simplest. A yellow finch against a plain, pale ground, chained to a perch by its twig of an ankle. "He was Rembrandt's pupil, Vermeer's teacher," my mother said. "And this one little painting is really the missing link between the two of them. That pure daylight you can see where Vermeer got his quality of light from." Of course, I didn't know or care about any of that when I was a kid, the historical significance, but it's there. I stepped back to get a better look. It was a direct and matter-of-fact little creature, with nothing sentimental about it, and something about the neat, compact way it tucked down inside itself. Its brightness, its alert, watchful expression made me think of pictures I'd seen of my mother when she was small, a dark-capped finch with steady eyes. "It was a famous tragedy in Dutch history," my mother was saying. "A huge part of the town was destroyed." What? The disaster of Delft that killed Fabricius. Did you hear the teacher back there telling the children about it? I had. There had been a trio of ghastly landscapes by a painter named Egbert van der Pol. Different views of the same smoldering wastelands, burnt, ruined houses, a windmill with tattered sails, crows wheeling in smoky skies. An official-looking lady had been explaining loudly to a group of middle-aged schoolkids that a gunpowder factory had exploded at Delft in the 1600s. That the painter had been so haunted and obsessed by the destruction of his city that he painted it over and over. Well, Egbert was Fabricius' neighbor. He sort of lost his mind after the powder explosion. At least that's how it looks to me. But Fabricius was killed and his studio was destroyed, along with almost all his paintings, except this one. She seemed to be waiting for me to say something, but when I didn't, she continued. He was one of the greatest painters of his day, and in one of the greatest ages of painting, very famous for his time. It's sad, though, because maybe only 5 or 6 paintings survived of all his work. All the rest of it is lost. Everything he ever did. The girl and her grandfather were loitering quietly to the side, listening to my mother talk, which was a bit embarrassing. I glanced away and then, unable to resist, glanced back. They were standing very close, so close I could have reached out and touched them. She was baiting and plucking at the old man's sleeve, tugging his arm to whisper something in his ear. Anyways, if you ask me, my mother was saying, this is the most extraordinary picture in the whole show. Fabricius is making clear something that he discovered all on his own, that no painter in the world knew before him, not even Rembrandt. Very softly, so softly, I could barely hear her, I heard the girl whisper, it had to live its whole life like that. I'd been wondering the same thing, the shackled foot, the chain was terrible. Her grandfather murmured some reply, but my mother, who seemed totally unaware of them, even though they were right next to us, stepped back and said, such a mysterious piece. So simple, really tender, invites you to stand close, you know? All those dead pheasants back there, and then this little living creature. I allowed myself another stealthy glimpse in the girl's direction. She was standing on one leg, with her hips swung out to the side. Then, quite suddenly, she turned and looked me in the eye. In a heart skip of confusion, I looked away. What was her name? Why wasn't she in school? I'd been trying to make out the scribbled name on the flute case, but even when I leaned in as far as I dared without being obvious, still I couldn't read the bold, spiking marker strokes. More drawn than written, like something spray-painted on a subway car. The last name was short, only 4 or 5 letters. The first looked like, like R, or was it P? People die, sure, my mother was saying, but it's so heartbreaking and unnecessary how we lose things. From pure carelessness, fires, war, the Parthenon, used as munition storehouse. I guess that anything we manage to save from history is a miracle. The grandfather had drifted away, a few paintings over, but she was loitering a few steps behind, the girl, and kept casting glances back at me and my mother. Beautiful skin, milky white, arms like carved marble. Definitely she looked athletic, though too pale to be a tennis player. Maybe she was a ballerina or a gymnast or even a high diver, practicing late in the shadowy indoor pools, echoes and refractions, dark tile. Plunging with arched chest and pointed toes at the bottom of the pool, a silent pow, shiny black swimsuit, bubbles foaming and streaming off her small, tense frame. Why do I obsess over people like this? Was it normal to fixate on strangers in this particularly vivid, fevered way? I didn't think so. It was impossible to imagine some random passerby on the street forming quite such an interest in me, and yet it was the main reason I had gone to those houses with Tom. I was fascinated by strangers, wanted to know what food they ate, what dishes they ate it from, what movies they watched, and what music they listened to. Wanted to look under their beds and in their secret drawers and night tables and inside the pockets of their coats. Often, I saw interesting-looking people on the street and thought about them restlessly for days, imagining their lives, making up stories about them on the subway or the crosstown bus. Years had passed, and I still hadn't stopped thinking about the dark-haired children in Catholic uniforms, brother and sister, I'd seen in Grand Central, literally trying to pull their father out of the door of a seedy bar by the sleeves of his suit jacket. Nor had I forgotten the frail gypsyish girl in a wheelchair out in front of Carlisle Hotel, talking breathlessly in Italian to the fluffy dog in her lap, while a sharp character in sunglasses, father, bodyguard, stood behind her chair, apparently conducting some sort of business deal over the phone. For years, I'd turned those strangers over in my mind, wondering how they were and what their lives were like. And I knew I would go home and wonder about this girl and her grandfather the same way. The old man had money. You could tell from how he was dressed. Why was it just the two of them? Where were they from? Maybe they were part of some big, old, complicated New York family. Music people, academics, one of those large, artsy West Side families that you saw up around Columbia or at Lincoln Center matinees. Or maybe homely, civilized old creatures that he was. Maybe he wasn't her grandfather at all. Maybe he was a music teacher and she was the flute prodigy he had discovered in some small town, brought to play at Carnegie Hall. Theo, my mother said suddenly, did you hear me? Her voice brought me back to myself. We were in the last room of the show. Beyond lay the exhibition shop, postcards, cash register, glossy stacks of art books, and my mother, unfortunately, had not lost track of time. We should see if it's still raining, she was saying. We've got a little while. Looking at her watch, glancing past me at the exit sign, but I think I'd better go downstairs if I'm going to try and get something for Mathilde. I noticed the girl observing my mother as she spoke, eyes gliding curiously over my mother's sleek black ponytail, her white satin trench coat cinched at the waist, and it thrilled me to see her for a moment as the girl saw her as a stranger. Did she see how my mother's nose had the tiniest bump at the top? Or had she broken it falling out of a tree as a child? Or how the black rings around the light blue irises of my mother's eyes gave her a slightly wild quality, as some steady hunting creature alone on a plain? You know, my mother looked over her shoulder. If you don't mind, I might run back and take another look at the anatomy lesson before we leave. I didn't get to see it up close, and I'm afraid I might not make it back before it comes down. She started away, shoes clacking busily, and then glanced at me as if to say, "Are you coming?" This was so unexpected that for a split second I didn't know what to say. I said, recovering, I'll meet you in the shop. Okay, she said, buy me a couple of cards, will you? I'll be back in a sec. And off she hurried. Before I had a chance to say a word, heart pounding, unable to believe my luck, I watched her walking rapidly away from me in the white satin trench coat. That was it, my chance to talk to the girl. But what can I say to her? I thought furiously. What can I say? I dug my hands in my pocket, took a breath or two to compose myself, and, excitement fizzing bright in my stomach, turned to face her. But, to my consternation, she was gone. That is to say, she wasn't gone. There was her red hand moving reluctantly, or as it seemed, across the room. Her grandpa had slipped his arm through hers and, whispering to her with great enthusiasm, was towing her away to look at some picture on the opposite wall. I could have killed him. Nervously, I glanced at the empty doorway. Then I dug my hands deeper in my pocket and, face burning, walked conspicuously across the length of the gallery. The clock was ticking, and my mother would be back any second. And though I knew I didn't have the nerve to barge up and actually say something, I could at the very least get a last look at her. Not long before, I had stayed up late with my mother and watched Citizen Kane. And I was very taken with the idea that a person might notice in passing some bewitching stranger and remember her for the rest of his life. Someday I too might be like the old man in the movie, leaning back in my chair, with a far look in my eyes and saying, that was 60 years ago, and I never saw that girl with the red hair again. But you know what? Not a month has gone by in all that time that I haven't thought of her. I was more than halfway across the gallery when something strange happened. A museum guard ran across the open doorway of the exhibition shop beyond. He was carrying something in his arms. The girl saw it too. Her golden brown eyes met mine, a startled, quizzical look. Suddenly another guard flew out of the museum shop. His arms were up and he was screaming. Heads went up. Someone behind me said in an odd, flat voice, "Oh! Oh!" The next instant, a tremendous ear-splintering blast shook the room. The old man, with a blank look on his face, stumbled sideways. His outstretched arms, knotty fingers spread, is the last thing I remember seeing. At almost exactly the same moment, there was a black flash with debris sweeping and twisting around me, and a roar of hot wind slammed into me and threw me across the room. And that was the last thing I knew for a while. I don't know how long I was out. When I came to, it seemed as if I was flat on my stomach in a sandbox, on some dark playground, someplace I didn't know, a deserted neighborhood. A gang of tough, runty boys was bunched around me, kicking me in the ribs and the back of the head. My neck was twisted to the side and the wind was knocked out of me, but that wasn't the worst of it. I had sand in my mouth. I was breathing sand. The boys muttered audibly, "Get up, asshole. Look at him, look at him. He don't know dick." I rolled over and threw my arms over my head and then, with an airy, surreal jolt, saw that nobody was there. I rolled over and threw my arms over my head and then with an airy... For a moment, I lay there too stunned to move. Alarm bells clanged in a muffled distance. As strange as it seemed, I was under the impression that I was lying in the wall and courtyard of some godforsaken housing project. Somebody had beaten me up pretty good. I ached all over. My ribs were sore and my head felt like someone had hit me with a lead pipe. I was working my jaw back and forth and reaching for my pockets to see if I had train fare home, when it came over me abruptly that I had no clue where I was. Stiffly, I lay there in the growing consciousness that something was badly out of joint. The light was all wrong, and so was the air, acrid and sharp, a chemical fog that burned my throat. The gum in my mouth was gritty. And when, head pounding, I rolled over to spit it out, I found myself blinking through layers of smoke at something so foreign I stared for some moments. I was in a ragged white cave. Swags and tatters dangled from the ceiling. The ground was tumbled and buckled up with heaps of gray substance like moon rock, and blown out with broken glass and gravel and hurricane of random trash, bricks and slag and papery stuff frosted with a thin ash like first frost. High overhead, a pair of lamps beamed through the dust like off-kilter car lights in fog, cockeyed, one angled upright, and the other rolled to the side, casting skewed shadows. My ears rang, so did my body, an intensely disturbing sensation, bones, brain, heart, all thrumming like a struck bell. Faintly, for somewhere far away, the mechanical shriek of alarms rang steady and impersonal. I could hardly tell if the noise was coming from inside me or outside me. There was a strong sense of being alone in wintry deadness. Nothing made sense in any direction. In a cascade of grit, my hand on some not quite vertical surface, I stood wincing at the pain in my head. The tilt of the space where I was had a deep innate wrongness. On one side, smoke and dust hung in the still blanketed layer. On the other, a mass of shredded material slanted down in a tangle where the roof or the ceiling should have been. My jaw hurt. My face and knees were cut. My mouth was like sandpaper. Blinking around at the chaos, I saw a tennis shoe, drifts of crumbly matter, stained dark and twisted aluminum walking stick. I was swaying there, choked and dizzy, not knowing where to turn or what to do, when all of a sudden, I thought I heard a phone ringing. For a moment, I wasn't sure. I listened hard, and then it spiraled off again, faint and draggy, a little weird. Clumsily, I grappled around in the wreckage, upending dusty kitty purses and day packs, snatching my hands back at hot springs and shards of broken glass, more and more troubled by the way the rubble gave under my feet in spots, and by the soft, inert lumps at the edges of my vision. Even after I became convinced I'd never heard a phone, that ringing in my ears had played a trick on me. Still, I kept looking, locked into the mechanical gestures of searching with an unthinking, robot intensity. Among pens, handbags, wallets, broken glass, hotel cards, compact and perfume spray and prescription medication, Reutemann, Andrea, alprazolam, 25 milligrams. I unearthed the keychain flashlight and a non-working phone, half charged, no bars, which I threw in a collapsible nylon shopping bag I'd found in some lady's purse. I was gasping, half choked with plaster dust, and my head hurt so badly I could hardly see. I wanted to sit down, except there was no place to sit. When I saw a bottle of waters, my eyes reverted fast and strayed over the havoc until I saw it again. About 15 feet away, half buried in a pile of trash. Just a hint of a label, familiar shade of cold case blue. With benubbed heaviness, like moving through snow, I began to slog and weave through the debris, rubbish breaking under my feet in sharp glacial-sounding cracks. But I had not made it very far when out of the corner of my eye I saw a movement on the ground, conspicuous in the stillness, a stirring of white on white. I stopped. Then I waded a few steps closer. It was a man, flat on his back and whitened head to toe with dust. He was so well camouflaged in the ash-powdered wreckage that it was a moment before his form came clear, chalk on chalk, struggling to sit up like a statue knocked off his pedestal. And I drew closer. I saw that he was old and very frail, with the misshapen hunchback quality. His hair, what he had, was blown straight up from his head. The side of his face was stippled with an ugly spray of burns. And his head above one ear was a sticky black horror. I had made out of it to where he was when, unexpectedly fast, he shot out his dust-whitened arm and grabbed my hand. In panic, I started back. He only clutched me tighter, coughing with a sick wetness. Where, he seemed to say, where, he was trying to look up at me, but his head dangled heavy on his neck and his chin lolled on his chest so that he was forced to peer under his brow at me like a vulture. But his eyes in his ruined face were intelligent and despairing. "Oh my God," I said, bending to him. Wait. And then I stopped, not knowing what to do. His lower half twisted on the ground like a pile of dirty clothes. He braced himself with his arms, gamely it seemed, lips moving and still struggling to raise himself. He reeked of burned hair, burned wool, but the lower half of his body seemed disconnected from the upper, and he coughed and fell back in a heap. I looked around trying to get my bearings, deranged from the crack on the head, with no sense of time or even if it was day or night. The grandeur and desolation of the space baffled me, the high, rare loft of it, layered in gradations of smoke, billowing with tangled tent-like effects where the ceiling or the sky ought to be. But though I had no idea where I was or why, still there was half-remembered quality about the wreckage. a cinematic charge in the glare of the emergency lamps. On the internet, I'd seen footage of a hotel blown up in the desert, where the honeycombed rooms at the moment of collapse were frozen in such a blast of light. Then I remembered the water. I stepped backwards, looking all around until the leap of my heart I spotted the dusty flash of blue. "Look," I said, edging away. The old man was watching me with a gaze at once hopeful and hopeless, like a starved dog too weak to walk. "No, wait, I'm coming back." Like a drunk, I staggered through the rubbish, weaving and plowing, stepping high-kneed over objects, muddling through bricks and concrete and shoes and handbags and a whole lot of charred bits I didn't want to see too closely. The bottle was 3/4 full and hot to the touch, but at the first swallow, my throat took charge and I gulped more than half of it. Plastic tasting, dishwater warm. Before I realized that I was doing and forced myself to cap it and put in the bag and take back to him. Kneeling beside him, rocks digging into my knees, he was shivering, breathing, rasping, and uneven. His gaze didn't meet mine, but stayed above it, fixed fretfully on something I didn't see. I was fumbling for the water when he reached his hand over my face. Carefully with his bony, old, flat pad fingers, he brushed the hair on my eyes and plucked a thorn of glass from my eyebrow and then patted me on the head. There. His voice was very faint, very scratchy, very cordial with a ghastly pulmonary whistle. We looked at each other for a long, strange moment that I've never forgotten. Actually, like two animals meeting at twilight, during some clear, personable spark seemed to fly up through his eyes, and I saw the creature he really was, and he, I believe, saw me. For an instant, we were wired together and humming, like two engines on the same circuit. Then he lolled back again, so limply that I thought he was dead. "Here," I said, awkwardly slipping my hand under his shoulder. "That's good." I held up his head as best I could and helped him drink from the bottle. He could only take